Chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins and CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. Ellie, let me go to you first. What's your reaction to what we've been hearing so far?
Well, it's pretty orderly, all things said. Donald Trump seems to have gone on a little bit of a tirade, but nothing unpredictable, nothing different from what he said before. One thing that I think is interesting is there's been no talk whatsoever, except from Donald Trump, about the actual conduct that Donald Trump was tried and found guilty for. For a while, the DA was trying to say this conduct of hiding the hush money payments.
Okay,
there we go. So
right
that's
there.
the official moment of the sentence. Donald Trump has now been sentenced to an unconditional discharge.
What does that mean?
That means that it is now official, that Donald Trump has been convicted of a felony. There's two parts of that equation, the conviction, and now we have part two, the sentence. So that is a moment. We now have Donald Trump. I guess you can technically, if you would like to call him a convicted felon, that is a label that now technically applies. But of course, he does have his appeal rights. But again, the focus has been, okay, lawyers are packing up. So
yeah, Judge Merchan is off the bench.
Yeah,
it happened that quickly.
In a lot of ways, not that different from any other sentencing. It took 38 minutes. That's about average for a sentencing in state court. But the focus has largely been on Trump's out-of-court conduct.
Yeah, Caitlin, what do you think? You've been watching all this.
Well, the most interesting statement from Judge Merchan just a few moments ago before he left the bench was acknowledging Trump's election win. He was saying, you know, ordinary citizens don't get these kind of legal protections. It's the office of the presidency that is bestowing these to the office holder. And he said, it is the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, essentially acknowledging that, yes, because Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated in a few days, that is changing the sentencing here. I mean, if this had happened in July before he had actually won, you could see, you know, that was way before he was afforded those protections and how different that was.
And Caitlin, you were reporting that Donald Trump did not have to appear in court this morning. He did this over video.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed from attending this trial when it was going on is that the way that the Trump team has framed Justice Merchan and how he acts here is so different than what I personally witnessed and reported on from court, which is that the judge actually goes out of his way and bends over backwards a lot of the time to accommodate Donald Trump. He was never bothered when Trump was sitting there, you know, hitting his attorneys, passing them notes, talking sometimes out loud during the hearing. And instead, he allowed him to appear virtually from Mar-a-Lago with his attorney there, Todd Blanche. Another attorney, I believe, was in court.
Is that a photo? We're looking at it right now.
Yeah, and so see the two of them appearing side by side. He was not there actually in the courtroom, which, as Ellie would note, I would assume is pretty unusual for
almost
you to not
unheard
be present.
of. Almost unheard of.
Ellie, what do you make of these images that we're looking at right here?
Well, they got fully dressed up.
This is historic.
I mean, right, and look, this is a criminal defendant at his sentencing sitting in front of the American flag. I mean, I promise you that's never happened before in American history. But as Caitlin said, you know, the judge made clear that you are only getting this sentence. The DA said the same thing because of your status as president. And look, in our legal and constitutional system, the president just is different. One thing we will never know, I wish we could somehow figure this out, what would the sentence have been if Trump had not won the election, right? I mean, there certainly would have been some sort of probation. Judge Merchan, would he have sentenced to prison? Is one of those hypotheticals we'll never know.
Because Laura Coates was saying just a few moments ago that this was essentially a slap on the wrist. This is actually less than that.
I was going to say, at least you feel a slap on the wrist. I'm not sure that this is even that. But again, it does make the conviction official.
Caitlin, I mean, if we could show that image one more time of Trump with his attorney there in that monitor, that is something else. And at one point, I think we just saw an image of him sort of pointing his finger, there it is, at the camera. I guess we don't know what is going on there, but we can guess.
Well, and also, Jim, just to think of it in the full circle moment of, you know, we were covering the White House when this story was kind of first unraveling and being reported publicly, and we learned about the hush money payments and learned about the cover-up and watched Rudy Giuliani go on TV and talk about this. That was so interesting, and to see how that has developed from this moment to now, Trump appearing virtually for this sentencing, which, you know, his attorneys and people in his orbit, his top advisors, had argued this is pretty much a best-case scenario from where we were when this guilty verdict came down last May. They, you know, a lot of options, as Ellie noted, had he lost, could have happened here. And so they were arguing essentially take this and go with it. But Trump himself doesn't want to be sworn in as a convicted felon. He now will be as a result of this. But I think to Judge Merchan's point, I mean, the election happened months after Trump was convicted. The American people had enough time to take this guilty verdict in, to digest it, and still, it didn't bother them enough to not reelect him. And that's his argument.
You know, people have said that Donald Trump has just completed the greatest political comeback ever in our history. Maybe I'm not a political expert, but legally, Think back a year and a half ago. I don't believe there's ever been another human being in the history of this country who's been under 4 separate simultaneous indictments in 4 separate jurisdictions. He was looking at 4 trials. Any one of them could have resulted in his imprisonment. Now here we are. This is it. An unconditional discharge on one of the cases. Completely impossible to have predicted this a year and a half ago.
Yeah, he pulled off this incredible political comeback, but at the same time, he is going to be making history. He is going to be entering the White House as a convicted felon until he's able to deal with this in the courts as that legal process continues. Is that essentially it?
That is correct. He is a convicted felon now. He will be 10 days from now when he takes the oath of office. But again, important to keep in mind, like all defendants, he has his appeal rights. That'll take many, many months, so it could happen that...
And he could go from the White House to the courthouse or appear virtually from the White House as this appellate process continues on?
Yeah, so defendants don't usually physically appear for their appeals. It's done on paper with briefs, and then when there's oral arguments, his lawyers, Caitlin raises a good question, who's even going to do this? Because his whole team is coming with him to the administration. He'll find someone. But the lawyers do the oral argument. Defendants... usually do not attend those arguments, but, 6-8 months from now, maybe he'll choose to.
We'll see. And Caitlin, you and I were just talking about covering Trump at the White House. Another person who was covering